Rick Rude was truly a once-in-a-lifetime talent, the kind of worker who had the million-dollar look, moves executed with athletic precision, and an ego that dwarfed his impressive championship belt collection. But everything changed in 1994 when a dive from the top rope went horribly wrong. It didn't just end a Hall of Fame career, it set the stage for his tragic, untimely passing. Rick Rude was born Richard Rude on December 7, 1958, in St. Peter, Minnesota. He later relocated to Robbinsdale, Minnesota, living with his parents, his 4 sisters, and his brother Michael. Looking back now, it is clear that his high school years were essentially a breeding ground for future legends. Rick's best friend growing up was none other than Curt Hennig, the son of the legendary Larry the Axe Hennig. Larry was a massive star in the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, back when Rick and Curt were just teenagers. It is wild to think that many of Rick's classmates at Robbinsdale High, Tom, Zenk, Brady Boone, Nikita Koloff, John Nord, and Barry Darsow all became professional wrestlers too. Of course, some would find fame under different gimmicks. After graduating high school in 1976, Rick attended Anoka Ramsey Community College, earning a degree in physical education. To pay the bills, he took a job bouncing at a Minneapolis dive called Grandma B's. This was a rough joint, a hangout for hard-nosed working-class folks. Rick figured this was just a temporary gig, to bridge the gap before his teaching career started. At the bar, he worked alongside his old classmates Barry Darsow and John Nord, who were also handling security. Rick eventually bonded with 3 other bouncers on the payroll: Michael Hegstrand, Joe Laurinaitis, and Scott Norton. During this period, he started testing his strength in arm wrestling tournaments. Little did Rick know that teaching degree would gather dust, all because of the man pouring drinks behind the bar. The bartender at Grandma B's was Eddie Sharkey, a legitimate tough guy who had wrestled in the 1960s. He worked under the name Eddie Sharkey, and had even tagged with Larry Hennig in a bid for the AWA World Tag Team Championship back in 1963. By the time he was slinging drinks at Grandma B's, Sharkey had already helped break in massive names like Jesse the Body Ventura, Paul Ellering, and Bob Backlund, who was holding the World Wrestling Federation strap at the time. When Sharkey looked at the monster bouncers protecting his bar in 1982, he saw dollar signs. He knew they could be the next generation of superstars. All 6 bouncers agreed to give the business a shot, and the timing could not have been better. Some disgruntled talent from the AWA approached Sharkey about launching an outlaw promotion. Sharkey founded Pro Wrestling America, and his new students, including Rick, were on the ground floor. They cut their teeth in small venues, nightclubs, and VFW halls. This was the classroom where Rick and the boys learned the fundamentals before getting the call from the major territories. Rick and his buddy, Joe Laurinaitis, headed down to the Mid-Atlantic Territory. Rick's first recorded bout was actually against Joe on November 1st, 1982, in Greenville, South Carolina. The match went to a draw as the curtain jerker. Rick worked as Ricky Rude, while Joe used the name Joe Lauren. It was a grueling schedule. That first week, they wrestled each other 4 times, trading wins. At the end of the month, Rick earned his first shot at gold, entering a 22-man battle royal for the NWA Television Championship. He didn't take the belt. That honor went to Bad Leroy Brown, but even then, Rick's physique was turning heads. Despite the look, he was still green. In Mid-Atlantic, he was mostly stuck in the opener, staring at the lights for established stars like Sergeant Slaughter and Greg Valentine. By the end of 1982, Rick hit the road to polish his craft, doing a short stint in the Continental Wrestling Association and Vancouver All-Star Wrestling. In June 1983, he arrived in Georgia Championship Wrestling, where he ran into some very familiar faces. During his first month in the territory, Rick was booked in a tag team tournament with Joe Lightfoot. The office had them lose in the first round to put over a dominating new gimmick called the Road Warriors, who were, of course, Rick's old bouncing partners, Joe and Mike, now terrifying fans as Animal and Hawk. While the Road Warriors were getting the Rockets strapped to their backs, Rick was still finding his voice and his in-ring psychology. During this short Georgia run, he picked up wins over solid hands like Bob Roop and Killer Tim Brooks on the house show loop, but the promotion still used him to job for bigger names like Larry Zbyszko and Mr. Wrestling 2. However, the bookers were grooming him for a spot on World Championship Wrestling, which eventually opened the door for bookings in Bill Watts' Mid-South territory. In Mid-South, Rick picked up some mid-card wins over guys like Rip Rogers, but his most significant spot was teaming with Mike Jackson to put over the debut of the Midnight Express. The office also briefly paired him with Lanny Poffo for a program against the Midnight Express in late 1983 and early 1984. Years later, Jim Cornette revealed that Loverboy Dennis Condrey was frustrated working with Rick, who was still learning the ropes, though that $1 million physique was his ticket in. But let's set the scene. A young green Rick stepping into the squared circle at the Dallas Sportatorium. It is January 6, 1984. The ring announcer botches the introduction, calling him Rick Rudd, and within 2 minutes, the Ugandan giant Kamala absolutely squashes him. Do not let that jobber match fool you though. It is barely a footnote in the massive legacy that was about to be built. While that was happening, the territory bosses were pulling strings behind the curtain that would shift the entire landscape of the business. Mid-South owner Bill Watts was looking to shake things up, so he cut a talent trade deal with Jerry Jarrett over in the CWA. Watts scored big, bringing in Bill Dundee and the Rock and Roll Express, while Rick was shipped up the river to Memphis alongside Jim Neidhart and Larry Higgins. Nobody realized it at the time, but that trade was the best thing that could have happened to Rick's career, because it paired him with a genius. Enter Jimmy Hart. The Mouth of the South saw the diamond in the rough and decided to overhaul everything, starting with changing the spelling to R-U-D-E. The transformation was instant. We watched the birth of Ravishing Rick Rude, a narcissist who cared more about his reflection than his opponent. He would ignore his stunning valet, Angel, just to pose. He ditched the generic trunks for those custom tights that became his trademark. It was not just a wardrobe update. It was the creation of one of the most heat-seeking heels in the history of the sport. The new character debuted on January 24th, 1984, and the swagger was off the charts immediately. Billed from Beverly Hills, California, he dismantled Jerry Gray in just over 2 minutes, but the wrestling was secondary to the attitude. The real money started flowing when he locked horns first with Dutch Mantell, and then with the perfect foil, the universal heartthrob, Austin Idol. The chemistry was electric. You had two alpha males clashing, with Idol doing workout segments on Memphis television to pop the crowd. Rude, playing the arrogant heel to perfection, made suggestive cracks about Angel and mocked Idol's physique during a sit-down with Lance Russell. He looked right into the camera, claimed he did not even need to train to look that good, and called Idol a fat slob to spark the feud. But the psychology here was brilliant. When Idol actually stormed out to confront him face to face, the tough guy act evaporated. Rude showed his true colors, backpedaling into the corner, claiming he was misunderstood and actually idolized the guy. It was classic cowardly heel work. Idol slapped the taste out of his mouth, and Rude, the guy who talked all that trash, scrambled away. He retreated with his tail between his legs, but that humiliation just turned up the temperature on the whole program. Rude refused to appear on television until he got an apology, even sending Angel out with a pre-written note for Idol to sign. Idol, naturally, tore the paper to shreds, sending the crowd into a frenzy and setting the stage for their run in March. They fought over the AWA International Heavyweight strap, with Rude ramping up the villainy by treating Angel like dirt at ringside. Rude managed to steal a disqualification win, but the gold stayed around Idol's waist as the rivalry got more personal. By April, they took the gloves off. We are talking leather strap matches, tied wrist to wrist, fighting to touch the corners. The gimmick was climbing a pole to grab the strap, and Idol usually dominated these bloodbaths, giving the fans what they wanted. The humiliation peaked on April 16th at the Mid-South Coliseum when Rude lost a stipulation match and was forced to wear a dress. They blew off the feud inside a steel cage at Louisville Gardens on April 24th, with Idol going over one last time. But Rude rebounded instantly, setting his sights on the King of Memphis himself, Jerry Lawler, and the Southern Heavyweight title. On June 11th, 1984, back at the Coliseum, the torch was passed in a chaotic main event. Rude had Jim Neidhart and Angel running interference, but early on, Lawler's experience seemed too much for the young upstart. Anvil's interference backfired, the ref took a bump, and it looked like the King had the match in the bag. Then came the spot everyone remembers. Angel jumped onto the apron, distracting Lawler just long enough for Rude to blindside him. In a massive upset, Rude hooked the leg and pinned Lawler, capturing his first major championship and putting the territory on notice. The reign was short-lived though, as he dropped the belt to Wildfire Tommy Rich in a winner-takes-all match on July 16th. But the war with Lawler was far from over, and the violence was about to escalate to a whole new level. On July 23rd, Rude won a match that allowed him to whip Lawler 10 times with a leather lash in the middle of the ring. Lawler got his receipt a week later, beating Rude in a strap-on-a-pole match. But the post-match angle is what is burned into our memories. Jimmy Hart and Angel stormed the ring, and in the heat of the moment, Lawler grabbed Angel and hit her with a pile driver. It was a shocking spot for 1984, taking the valet out of commission and sending the crowd into stunned silence. Rude showed up on television the next week, selling the rage perfectly, acting like a man possessed over what happened to his girl. He did not just cut a promo, he led the camera crew and the studio audience out into the parking lot for a segment that felt dangerously real. In a legendary piece of live TV, Rude took an aluminum baseball bat to Lawler's personal car, smashing the windshield and headlights. The fans were climbing over each other just to see the destruction, and when Lawler came running out, Rude made his escape, speeding off in a getaway car with his massive new heavy, King Kong Bundy. But the bitter rivalry demanded a proper finish, and it got one on August 27, 1984, inside a steel cage at the Mid-South Coliseum, where the drama hit a fever pitch when Bundy tried to bail Rude out by tossing a baseball bat through the mesh, but in a perfect spot, Lawler intercepted the weapon, gave Rude a taste of his own medicine, and pinned him for the 3 count, delivering the kind of poetic justice Memphis fans lived for. After the explosive Lawler program wrapped, Memphis Creative took a massive gamble with Rick Rude, spending months building him as the territory's most despised heel, only to suddenly try and turn him babyface, a booking decision that baffled everyone at the time, though it started with a win on October 8th, 1984, when Rude and Bundy decimated the Cosper Fabulous Ones to capture the AWA Southern Tag Team Championship, a victory that earned them a huge opportunity against the Road Warriors for the AWA World Tag Team titles. But this is where the wheels started to come off during their October 15th bout at the Mid-South Coliseum, because while the referee was distracted, Bundy had Hawk dead to rights, but when Rude went up top for a high-risk move, Hawk rolled out of the way and Rude crashed down onto his own partner. The Road Warriors took the win, and while Bundy was livid, they managed to coexist for a brief moment. But the writing was on the wall, because just 1 week later, while defending the Southern tag straps against the Fabs, history repeated itself when Rude swung at Steve Kean in the corner, whiffed completely, and clocked Bundy instead, causing a furious Bundy to walk out and leave Rude to get worked over by Lane and Kean. And even though Bundy eventually tagged back in, the big man was still fuming, leading to the match's turning point where Rude held Lane for a double team move, but Lane ducked, causing Bundy to knock his partner out cold. The Fabulous Ones scored the pin to regain the titles, and the cracks in the first family had turned into a complete fracture. Imagine the heat in the building after the bell, with Rude arguing with Bundy while Jimmy Hart stood firmly in the corner of the Giant. And in a brutal turn, Bundy battered Rude with Hart's chain, leaving him a bloody mess in the center of the ring. And ironically, it was his former arch rivals, the Fabulous Ones, who rushed in to make the save. But here is the thing about those Memphis fans: they have long memories, and they simply refuse to buy Rude as a hero. So even pairing him with beloved faces like Jimmy Valiant and his old nemesis Jerry Lawler couldn't get him over. The Bundy feud fizzled out in just over a month, climaxing when Rude lost a loser leaves town match in early December, packing his bags and leaving the territory to return to his natural heel persona down in Florida. A move that brought fresh matchups and a partnership with the legendary Percy Pringle, where the Office wasted 0 time strapping a rocket to Rude's back, and in a stunning push, he defeated Pistol Pez Whatley for the Florida Southern Heavyweight Championship just days after arriving at the Tampa Sportatorium, kicking off a classic run where Rude would defend the gold against Whatley's relentless challenges, often by getting himself intentionally disqualified, saving his title through cowardice rather than wrestling ability, which was the Rick Rude persona that drew real money, arrogant, cunning, and back in his element. But just as he was hitting his stride defending that Southern strap against top-tier workers like Michael Hayes, Hector Guerrero, and of course Whatley, Brian Blair stepped up as the legitimate threat. And after a series of stiff contests starting in March 1985, Blair finally snatched the title from Rude on April 10th during a TV taping at the Sportatorium. And though Rude tried 3 times to get his belt back, Blair held his ground. Yet Rude's fortunes turned around just 6 days later at the Spartan Sports Center in Tampa, where he found success in the tag ranks alongside Jesse Barr, outworking the Youngblood brothers Jay and Mark to capture the Florida version of the United States Tag Team Championship, kicking off a reign where Rude and Barr ran the division for nearly 3 months until their luck ran out on July 2nd. In Tampa, dropping the straps to the rugged, hard-hitting combination of Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel. But the war wasn't over, as the rivalry escalated to a blow-off steel cage match at the Eddie Graham Sports Stadium in Orlando, where Haynes and McDaniel proved they were the better team that night. That cage match signaled the end of the feud and closed the chapter in Rude's Florida run, but in a classic display of persistence. Rude refused to walk away from tag team glory, trying out partnerships with veterans like Buddy Rose and Rip Oliver, but the gold eluded them. So on July 21st, Rude pivoted back to singles competition, defeating Mike Graham to regain the Florida Southern Heavyweight Championship, a win that put a target on his back and placed him squarely in the sights of Billy Jack Haynes, forcing Rude to spend that sweltering Florida summer defending his title. defending the title against Haynes. But as September rolled around, a legitimate legend stepped up to the plate, Wahoo McDaniel. On October 2nd, with the cameras rolling, Wahoo did what Billy Jack couldn't and stripped Rude of the Southern Heavyweight Championship. That long, bitter war between Rude's camp and the Wahoo-Haynes alliance finally blew off on October 21st in West Palm Beach, where Wahoo successfully defended the strap, effectively chasing Rude out of the territory. But in this business, the landscape shifts in a heartbeat. Days after that final loss, Rude and his manager Percy Pringle were already Texas-bound, eyeing the Von Erichs territory to make a name in world-class championship wrestling. The real story begins on an October night in 1985 at the Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum in Fort Worth. This wasn't the green kid who had a forgettable 2-minute job against Carmella years prior. This was a reinvented superstar. With Percy Pringle in his corner, Rude absolutely dismantled Dave Peterson. After a week of crushing enhancement talent, he locked onto a serious target, Iceman King Parsons and the American Heavyweight Championship. On November 11th, back in Fort Worth, Rude snatched the belt, a victory that immediately punched his ticket to the main event scene. World Class didn't waste a second. Suddenly, he's not just holding the gold, he's going to war with the royal family of Texas wrestling, trading shots with the Von Erich brothers in high-profile tags. But the most bizarre angle of Rude's early Dallas run involved the erratic missing Link. In a creative swerve, Link turned babyface, mesmerizingly drawn to the valet Sunshine. When Rude and Pringle tried to punish Link for the betrayal, they didn't expect Sunshine to hit the ring with a can of mace to make the save. This sparked a heat-filled program between Rude and anyone standing in Sunshine's corner, adding another layer to the target on his back. Late 1985 marked a massive shift in wrestling politics, and Rude was right in the eye of the storm, as Jim Crockett Jr. tightened his grip on the NWA, ending the tradition of the traveling touring champion. Fritz Von Erich responded by pulling World Class out of the alliance to form the World Class Wrestling Association. In a historic pivot, they upgraded Rude's American heavyweight title, crowning him the promotion's inaugural World Heavyweight Champion. But Fritz added a wrinkle to legitimize the belt. Unlike the old NWA statutes, World Class titles could now change hands on a disqualification. The timing was ironic because Rude had just weaseled out of a defense against Lance Von Erich, using that exact loophole, getting disqualified to save his skin. Now, the smart fans knew he actually had to wrestle to survive. Fast forward to May 4th, 1986. The third annual Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium. Rude defended against the wildest brawler in the game, Bruiser Brody. It was a schmoz. From the bell, with Pringle trying to get cute, only for Brody to drag the manager right into the ring. In the heat of the battle, Brody launched Rude over the top rope, an automatic DQ under Texas rules. Ironically, the very rule designed to stop Rude's cheating actually saved his reign this time. In a moment of pure bedlam, Rude and Pringle tried to bail through the tunnel, but Brody wasn't finished. He chased them down, sparking a locker room clearing brawl that the agents had to break up. The next 24 hours were pivotal. Rude bounced back immediately, defeating Lance Von Erich for the TV title at the Will Rogers Coliseum, making him a double champion, but the bill came due 2 weeks later. Rude got himself disqualified in a rematch with Brody, and this time, the rule bit him. He made history as the first guy to drop the strap on a DQ, handing the TV title to the big man. Then came the inevitable collapse during the summer heat. With referee David Manning bumped, Rude held Chris Adams for the kill while Pringle went up top with his cane. But in a spot that changed the trajectory of the territory, Adams dodged. Pringle clobbered Rude by mistake, Adams tossed the manager, and pinned the Ravishing One for the world title, leaving the Rude-Pringle alliance in tatters. The aftermath was pure theater. A sobbing Pringle tried to apologize, met only with a stiff shove from Rude before being left alone in the ring. They'd patch it up later, but the dynamic had shifted. Rude brought in his real-life sister, Nancy, as the valet Raven, but the momentum was fading. A tag run with the Dingo Warrior before he became the Ultimate One fell apart when Warrior turned face, leaving Rude to team with Joe's LeDuc in a forgotten tournament run that went nowhere. By late 1986, the writing was on the wall in Texas and Rude needed a fresh coat of paint. October brought that. Shift Jim Crockett Promotions was swallowing up territories like Mid-Atlantic and Georgia, consolidating power. Under the National Wrestling Alliance banner, Rude didn't waste time teaming with the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, to capture the NWA World Tag Team titles. This was the big leagues, where the money and the prestige truly lived as the territory days. Faded away for Rude, this wasn't just a jump, it was an ascension to the main stage. June 7th, 1987. marked the next chapter. Rude made his WWF debut at the Arco Arena in Sacramento, squashing Jose Estrada and immediately aligning with the Brain Bobby Heenan. But Rude wasn't just there to trade holds, he was about to revolutionize the entrance game. Forever gone was the smooth jazz of Sade, now replaced by that gritty, pulsating stripper beat that commanded attention before the bell. He'd grab the mic and demand silence, then proceed to tear down the local crowd, calling the men fat, out-of-shape sweat hogs while promising to give their ladies a look at what a real man was supposed to be. As the music kicked back in, Rude would slowly disrobe, unveiling a physique carved out of granite and those custom airbrush tights. Often featuring his own face, the women screamed while the men wanted to jump the guardrail and kill him. That is legitimate heat. The WWF took their time cooking this one, keeping him on the house show loops to refine the act while occasionally tagging him with fellow Heenan family members like Harley Race and his old world-class rival King Kong Bundy. By October, Rude was a television staple. They were quietly laying the groundwork for a rivalry that would define the era. Early 1988 saw Rude proving he was a main event player, standing toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan in January and putting on absolute work rate clinics with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. He was stacking up wins against solid hands like Junkyard Dog and Tito Santana, but the post-match ritual was the real hook. After the bell, Rude would pull a lucky lady from the crowd for the Rude Awakening kiss, a spot that drove fans wild. Then came March 19th, 1988 at the Show Me Center in Cape Girardeau. After a squash match, Rude and Bobby Heenan spotted a blonde in the front row, but this wasn't a plant she refused to enter the ring looking visibly frustrated. Rude went to ringside to browbeat her. That is when reality blurred with fiction. It was Cheryl Roberts, the legitimate wife of Jake the Snake Roberts. What followed was pure psychological warfare. Rude, never breaking character, grabbed the mic and called her a lowlife for being with a snake. Cheryl answered with a slap that echoed through the arena. When Rude grabbed her wrist, Jake exploded from the locker room, attacking Rude like it was a shoot. The boys from the back had to rush out to pull them apart. This wasn't just a storyline, it was personal, and it became the catalyst for one of the most intense programs in WWF history. In a strange twist of booking, they squared off at WrestleMania 4 in Atlantic City just 8 days after the altercation, but because the Cape Girardeau footage hadn't aired on syndication yet, the crowd sat on their hands, resulting in a 50-minute time limit draw, a technical dud for two masters of psychology. Once the angle finally hit TV, the feud caught fire. Rude and Roberts worked house shows all summer, but Rude had an ace up his sleeve that would become wrestling legend. He commissioned tights with Cheryl Roberts' face, airbrushed right on the crotch, prompting a dark warning from Jake not to wear them. Then came August 23rd in Providence, Rhode Island. After quickly beating Tommy Angel while wearing plain gear, Rude revealed the trap he peeled off the top layer to show a second pair. Underneath, featuring Cheryl's face, the crowd reaction was primal as Jake hit the ring and literally ripped the offending tights off Rude's body. While TV censors used a blue dot implying nudity, Rude was actually wearing flesh-colored gym shorts underneath. Despite the white-hot heat, the feud met an oddly abrupt end on Saturday night's main event, taped October 25th, 1988 in Baltimore. Roberts won via disqualification, but it felt flat. Jake later admitted the Office felt their rivalry was too intense and was overshadowing the Mega Powers storyline between Hogan and Savage Politics. 101 never outshined the Golden Goose, so they cut it short. It is the sad reality of the business. Even the best work can fall victim to the hierarchy after the Jake program cooled. Rude worked with Jimmy Snuka and the Big Boss Man before Destiny called again this time against the new champion, the Ultimate Warrior. Throughout the summer of 1990, Rude carried the load even, teaming with Mr. Perfect, Battle Warrior, and the Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich. In matches that showcased incredible talent, the chase culminated in the steel cage at SummerSlam 1990 in Philly, where Rude once again put his body on the line. The championship gold in New York had eluded him, and frustrated with the glass ceiling in the World Wrestling Federation, Rude made a bold call. He walked away, spending the better part of 1991 tearing it up in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But his eyes were fixed on the chaotic landscape of World Championship Wrestling. His homecoming to the States wouldn't just be a return, it would be a masterclass in theatrics. The date was October 27th, 1991. Halloween Havoc in Chattanooga. The fans watched with confusion as Paul E. dangerously walked out, flanked by a mysterious heavy known only as the WCW Phantom, decked out in black and white. This unknown shooter absolutely squashed Tom Zenk in under 2 minutes. Once the bell rang, dangerously grabbed the stick and put the locker room on notice. His monster was headhunting for Sting and the United States Championship. Then came the reveal. With his new valet Medusa standing by, the Phantom unmasked and the arena exploded. It was the Ravishing One. Rick Rude was back, and WCW instantly became the place to be. The Dangerous Alliance wasn't just another faction, it was a supergroup of elite workers, and Rick Rude immediately established himself as the ace of the deck. Weeks after that shock return, on November 19th, 1991, at Clash of the Champion 17, Rude systematically dismantled Sting to capture the United States Heavyweight Championship. That victory kicked off a reign of terror we rarely see in this business. Sting came for that belt 22 times, and 22 times, Rude found a way to leave as the champ. The heat between them escalated from standard bouts to vicious steel cage matches by March of 1992. Rude took the wins in Chicago and Englewood, while the Stinger managed to scrape out a single victory in Oakland. The war expanded into the tag division, with Rude leading his Dangerous Alliance soldiers into battle against Sting and a rotating army of babyfaces like Dustin Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, and the hard-hitting Steiner. Brothers. But Rude was a workhorse. At Super Brawl 2 in Milwaukee, he put on an absolute clinic in psychology against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. While Sting was busy taking the big gold belt off Lex Luger, Rude's run with the United States title would span over a year, cementing him as the company's most legitimate heel during an era stacked with legends. After proving he had Sting's number, Rude targeted the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in March of 1992, but booking politics kept the top prize just out of his hands. He transitioned into a 5-star series with Steamboat before grinding through a physically tolling program with Nikita Koloff involving steel cages and death matches. The bumps were adding up. His legendary reign didn't end with a 3 count, but with a doctor's note. After a defense against Eric Watts on WCW Saturday Night, a legitimate neck injury forced Rude to vacate the strap on January 1st, 1993, ending a massive 409-day run. By March, Rude was back on the road, working smart in tag matches with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff to protect his neck. By summer, he was back in the United States title mix, beating Dustin Rhodes. But the finish was messy. The WCW Board of Directors held up the title, ruling a double pin situation. This set the stage for a best-of-3 series between the veteran Rude and the young Rhodes, culminating on August 30th, 1993 in Atlanta. But the real story was at the announce table. Ric Flair was calling the action with Tony Schiavone and Jesse Ventura, and the real-life heat between Flair and Rude was palpable. It stemmed from a segment on A Flair for the Gold where Rude shot his shot with Flair's maid Fifi and got shut down. Rude's receipt? A cheap shot on Flair from behind using the big gold belt. With their showdown for the WCW International World Championship set for Fall Brawl, just 3 weeks later, the tension was at a boiling point. That August night in Atlanta went off the rails when Rude, seeing the ref down and Rhodes missing a bulldog, went to use a steel chair. But the Nature Boy wasn't having it. Flair hit the ring, snatched the weapon, giving Rhodes the opening to roll Rude up for the 1-2-3. Flair's interference was the gasoline on the fire for their Fall Brawl main event. The context here is crucial for the historians. The WCW International World Championship was in a weird spot. Even though WCW had formally withdrawn from the National Wrestling Alliance on September 1st, 1993, the NWA still recognized the big gold belt as their world title. At Fall Brawl in the Astro Arena in Houston, Rude used a pair of brass knucks to knock Flair out and take the belt. Technically, this made him the International and NWA World Champion. But there was a catch. The NWA board refused to sign off on the title. That dispute snapped the final thread between the two organizations. The Rude vs. Flair saga dragged on to Halloween Havoc 1993 in New Orleans, with Terry Taylor inserted as a guest referee. The bout was stiff and chaotic, ending in a classic dusty finish. Flair knocked Rude cold with Rude's own foreign object, the brass knuckles. Taylor countered the fall, but senior official Randy Anderson ran down to overrule it, disqualifying Flair. The Nature Boy got his revenge in blood, but the Ravishing One left New Orleans with the International World Championship still around his waist. The final run in 1994 offers a fascinating look at the tail end of his prime, starting with that Japanese tour where he dropped the big gold belt to Hiroshi Hase in Tokyo, only to snatch it back a week later in Kyoto before returning stateside to put over his archival sting at Spring Stampede in Rosemont, Illinois. But just 18 days after that loss, fate dealt a cruel hand on May 1st, 1994, inside the Fukuoka Dome, where Rude stepped into the ring against the Stinger for what nobody realized would be his final match. The bout was a classic work rate performance until a single terrifying spot changed history. Sting went for a suicide dive over the top rope and both men overshot the mark, crashing hard onto the raised platform surrounding the ring. Rude took the brunt of the impact on the edge of the dais, blowing out his C4 and C5 vertebrae. But what happened next proved his legitimate toughness with a broken back. He not only finished the match, but worked a finish involving a dive off the top rope, ultimately pinning Sting to win the WCW International World Heavyweight title for the third time. Unknowingly, the crowd had just watched the Ravishing One's curtain call at only 35 years old. That catastrophic back injury forced him to collect on his Lloyd's of London insurance policy and retire from active competition in a heartbreaking twist. One of the industry's greatest heels was stripped of his livelihood, but keeping Rick Rude away from the business entirely was impossible. He still had a few legendary swerves left to execute in the history of pro wrestling. The narrative picks up again in January 1997, nearly 3 years post-retirement, when the ECW faithful began noticing a masked man in a suit harassing franchise player Shane Douglas, even though it was the worst kept secret in Philadelphia that this was Rick Rude. The unmasking was electric. Rude traded his wrestling gear for a headset sitting alongside Joey Styles, where his articulate arrogance was the perfect fit for Paul Heyman's Renegade promotion, eventually showing his true colors by turning heel and aligning with Douglas to form a formidable version of the Triple Threat faction. Then came August 1997, when Rude shocked the dirt sheets by returning to the WWF, taking a non-wrestling role as the insurance policy for the original D-Generation X, alongside Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. But here is the kayfabe-breaking detail. Rude was working without a written contract, essentially doing business on a handshake deal per appearance. This clerical oversight by Vince McMahon would trigger one of the wildest moments of the Monday Night Wars. Rude shared a deep bond with the Hart family and considered himself a close personal friend of Bret Hart. So when the Montreal Screwjob went down at Survivor Series on November 9th, 1997, seeing Vince and Shawn conspire to screw Bret out of the title left Rude absolutely livid. Without giving notice to the WWF office, he immediately called Eric Bischoff at WCW to negotiate a jump. What followed was a masterclass in burning bridges that would rock the industry to its core. November 17th, 1997 stands as a historic date because in a move that exposed the taped nature of Raw, Rick Rude appeared live on WCW Monday Nitro with a mustache, while simultaneously appearing on a pre-taped episode of Raw is War. Sporting a full beard an hour later, no talent had ever worked both flagship shows on the same night. And because he had filmed ECW Hardcore TV earlier that weekend, Rude achieved the impossible feat of appearing on all three major televised promotions in the span of a single week. Over in WCW, he joined the NWO Black and White, becoming the first man to hold membership in both DX and the New World Order, mostly managing his real-life best friend Kurt Hennig and sticking by him during the split between the Hollywood and Wolfpack factions. By late 1998, both Minnesota legends vanished from WCW programming. Hennig was rehabbing a leg injury while Rude faced a terrifying testicular cancer scare that fortunately turned out to be benign. While Mr. Perfect would eventually return, Rude was quietly released from his WCW contract in April 1999. Looking back at that post-retirement era, it is remarkable how much gravity he carried without taking a single bump from the commentary desk in ECW to his game-changing television jumps and his manager run in WCW. He proved the Ravishing persona could draw heat just by grabbing a microphone on a somber day in 1999. Amidst whispers that he was training for a miraculous in-ring return, the wrestling community was hit with the gut-wrenching news that Rick Rude had passed away in his Alpharetta, Georgia home. Discovered by his wife, the final days of Rick Rude are shrouded in sadness. Just months prior, he had been in a car wreck that exacerbated the chronic agony in a back that had already been destroyed by decades of grappling. According to Bruce Pritchard, Rude's widow Michelle indicated he was living in severe, constant pain and had to manage a cocktail of heavy prescription painkillers just to find relief. The autopsy report told a tragic story, ruling the death an accidental overdose from mixed medications leading to heart failure, including gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a powerful central nervous system depressant used for narcolepsy that is incredibly dangerous when mixed with other substances. The empty pill bottles found at the scene painted a picture not of a party animal, but of a man desperate to numb the physical torment left by the brutal schedule of the 1980s and 90s. Rude's fate was a harsh reminder of the era's cost. The industry demanded he look like a Greek god and work like a machine, while providing zero infrastructure for addiction or physical rehabilitation, leading many of the boys to self-medicate just to make the next town, creating a toxic cycle that took way too many of our heroes early after his passing, the rumor mill. spun out of control, with some suggesting foul play or suicide given his intense personality, but the evidence points simply to a warrior whose body finally gave out. Naturally, the rumor mill spun dark theories about powerful enemies, whispering about tampered meds or even deliberate poisoning. While there isn't a shred of proof, these stories persist because they mirror the shady nature of a business built on backstage politics and cutthroat maneuvers. But while outsiders speculated that Rude's death was something sinister, the inner circle shut that down. Bruce Pritchard, who got the truth straight from Rick's widow Michelle, dismissed those conspiracy theories as total garbage. According to Michelle, everything pointed to a heartbreaking accident. The prescription bottles found at the scene suggest an accidental overdose, likely compounded by the pain from his recent car wreck. Some folks tried to connect imaginary dots, claiming Rude was checking out because he was overwhelmed by his physical injuries, but that's just speculation without facts. The gap between the Ravishing character and Richard Rude the man was massive. Fans hated him as the arrogant, hip-swiveling bad guy, but in reality, he was a family man who famously taped over his wedding ring because he refused to take it off to fight. He was loyal to the boys too. When the territories were dying and his old manager Percy Pringle was struggling down in Dallas, it was Rude who vouched for him in New York, getting him the job where he'd become the legendary pallbearer. In 2017, the business finally gave Rick Rude his flowers, inducting him posthumously into the WWE Hall of Fame. Don't miss our deep dive on Mr. Perfect and the real story behind his lost world title push. Like and subscribe for 100 years of good fortune. See you at the matches.